Hey, hello everyone. Greetings of the day. I hope we seem to be having a right composition today. Hey, I I was hoping that Wim is here too. Great. Shiv is here. Is there anyone specific whom we are waiting for, or are we good to go? I think we are good. Let me share my screen. Okay, folks, we have an agenda item, clear agenda item for today. First, maybe I hope I'm sharing the right screen. Do you see my nephew wiki page?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. All right. Okay. So a few of the things, let's get the regular things out of the way. We have new things that Ved had worked upon to further the cause of our improving the security score. Ved, do you want to quickly talk about it?
Yeah, there are couple of glow monitor checks which incorporates a security level checks also inside it. So we can address those issues by I had fixed some of the issues so that the glow monitor score can be improved and it will be reflected inside the glow monitor website. And in turn it will also improve the open SSL scorecard scores too.
Okay.
And if we can see uh, inside the Glow Monitor website, there are certain repos inside the Nephew project which we need to address to replicate the similar PRs so that we can achieve better score overall. I had shared the link in the chat, so you can have a look. Like there are similar kind of issues in multiple repos, so we need to address those too.
Okay. I think what Ved is trying to say here is that 3 pull requests. One is for the OpenSSF best practices badge. Currently, that badge that we have is for the OpenSSF score. The best practices badge is different one from the score. Then there is another pull request for contribution.md. Once we integrate the score will automatically improve, as well as the other aspects will improve. Having a depender bot is another important thing from the score perspective. There are a few other points that can be easily handled as part of what is the pull request that has all the parent issues. Is it the
It's 545. Yeah. 536, sorry, it's 536. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, this is the one, right? Like all these open action items, these are the open action items that Ved is currently targeting. If someone who has any uh, you know has some bandwidth, maybe they might want to join up here as well.
Also, these are pretty good first issues for the newcomers if they want to start with Nephew contribution and want to contribute in the progress of Nephew, so they can get started with these issues also. If there is any new folk in the meet.
Okay, so with that said, right, like I would like to just talk about one more page that we have created about good first issues. Ideally, we wanted to have it on the GitHub issues itself, but the challenge there is any good first issue that is marked there is across all the Nephew project, like it includes all the other things as well. So in the context of security, in the context of SIG security, how do you identify what are the good first issues and how can people pick up specific action items? So we have what the aim here is to just enlist the action items that might possibly be picked up by someone who is willing to take it up, and then the SIGs here can provide help in terms of might be guidance, it might be understanding of the ecosystem, but the intention would be to identify an owner or a contributor towards these aspects. Does this make sense? Again, this was something that was just floated yesterday. Is this something that makes sense? The only reason why we wanted to have it here and not in the GitHub repo itself is because in the GitHub repo, we have if a good first issue is marked, it would be marked across all the other issues. There, I mean, there will be a lot of good first issues across the whole project.
Yes, that makes sense because as the SIG security aspect, we need to address some of the good first issues, which is of the SIG security interest, and we should be tracking those progress inside a separate page, apart from being tracked inside the good first issues in the GitHub, because it will be covering the whole umbrella project. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, going to the second point. Is there any other point that anyone wants to bring up in terms of agenda bashing? Is there any additional point that anyone would like to add up today for discussion? Okay, let me go to the next point. Basically, we had a discussion on Friday with the RX scope, and it was a very good discussion. Basically, the aim there was to tell the working group there all the action items that are pursued in SIG security, and check the priority, check the what makes sense, what what doesn't make sense, and get a view of the land, so to speak. It was clearly understood that improving the security best practices score to greater than 7 as part of R3 scope. We will clearly make it as part of R3 scope. That was one of the action item that was in general agreed upon. There was one more action item that was mentioned, one that was related to handling signed releases. Currently, we do not have signed releases in Nephew. We make use of a Google project called as Kaneko for creating the container images, but that doesn't necessarily sign it. So if we want to just make sure that we can sign the container images that are created as part of Nephew project, that would be one of the action item. If someone can take up, that would be great. From the identity perspective, there was a great discussion there as well. I think once we in general, there was a consensus about handling the identity part first. That was clear. But again, like I said, the most important action item was improving the security best practices score, and then the question was about handling the signed releases, and then the question was about the identity. Any other point? Yeah.
Raul, did they?
Yes.
Okay, the discussion happened last Friday, but did they any the concrete schedule for R3, for example?
Oh, schedule for R3. I
Or
am
something.
sure what that schedule is. Does anyone else knows here what exactly is
No,
the
I mean what we're gonna propose next. Next step. For example,
Yeah.
you say discuss user identity, worker identity, and then other some best practices and signing, container signing. But did they tell? Is that okay? People proceed, or what was?
Yeah, so the intention was to actually tell them the work items and tell them the high level direction that we are going in, and check
Yeah.
whether there is any immediate resistance there, like or repulsion in the form of some
any
of those,
objection?
any objection there. But we didn't hear anything like that. At least I didn't hear anything like that. In terms of Spiffy Spire, we went ahead and actually demonstrated, showed the specific diagram that we had. So I don't think there was any objection there. One thing that would be required from this workload identity perspective that we have currently in the context of user identity is a slightly more detailed requirement specifically from the workload identity perspective, because uh, you know how exactly will the identity be covered? How can it be made use of by third-party systems, such as if you have to use it for the secrets management and things like that? Like some of those requirements we might have to capture properly, and putting up a reference implementation. I think as a SIG, right, I feel we should go on to the next level, not just hypothesize anymore, and look at doing the reference implementation. Again, now is the time to talk about it. I'm opening up this question to the team here at large. What do you think?
We can discuss there. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I agree, Rahul. I wonder if people have a view of what's needed in order to produce that reference implementation. So what do people feel is missing, either in terms of requirements or detail, or is it just a skill? Is it just a skills thing? For example.
Let's hear out Shiv and Prashant what they have to say in the context of workload identity. I know they have some updates in the context today, so they will be able to say in terms of user identity. If we have, I thought we had Manuel on the call, right? Like we have Manuel on the call and being you are on call. So
Yes.
From the reference implementation perspective, is there any specific how do you think we should approach this point is what the question is, I guess.
You will be giving me 30 minutes in next 20 minutes.
Hello.
Let me cover the user identity first, okay, and then Manuel probably chip in. Yeah.
Okay.
So in my experience, for example, we have the list requirement, and this is to me requirement is high level requirement to me. So that means for the reference implementation, I don't know what I think probably the Vim need more detail, but usually providing them epics and the user story, and providing some details, and then when the developers look at that epics and user story, then they know what to implement, and they decide how to implement. That's my understanding. So, and Manuela, do you have any?
But my idea is similar. Let me say that we can go a step further, detailing what we have today. And then, anyway, we need to find some development team to go on that still not clear who could be. I mean, could be Ericsson or other contributors, but at least as a little more detail added to the document that we have today, we can add it. We can work a little bit to give some more detail. I was wondering if the document as it is today will be proposed for the release as it is, and then we can go in detailing the requirement only after, or if we need to do something more before that is proposed and scheduled for the release.
Yeah, and then the detailed design architecture we need to provide, for example, how the component work together, link together, which API, which protocol need to exchange. So we need to define that. That means the developer need to know what to do. So
okay, this is the normal flow, but from the process, to be honest, I'm not expert here in Nefio. And then Raul, what do you think that this could be proposed in the release meeting anyway, and then we go on with the tail, or is still we need to get it at a different level before that we can propose it?
Yeah.
So basically what I'm hearing is, how do we decide whether the user story that is proposed can be accepted, right? Is it reviewed enough? Do we have enough amount of details in that in that user story? Like how do we how is it in general handled across other SIGs? Maybe Wim can shed some light here, or is it just based on consensus, local consensus?
Okay, so next Friday could be proposed, and then anyway, at the same time, we can work to detail to help the team that will take care of it.
I think I know how ONAP process, but Vim knows about Nephew process. How you initiate the project with the requirement, and what's the next step in Nephew? I think slightly different from other open source. So that's what I'd like to understand.
Yep.
Wim, do you have any specific opinion here?
Yeah.
Like, we would really love to understand what is your opinion, and I will look up to you to give us a understanding of how everyone else is doing it in the Napier.
We are changing a little bit the way we are doing things, I think.
Okay.
So that's why it's a little bit unclear. Because,
Okay.
I mean, if you look in the past, right, what did we do, right? So we so if you look to release 1 and release 2, I mean, it's not 100% correct what I'm going to say, but at the beginning, we were trying to build the foundation, if you will, right? So in other words, we were working on ports and how to do specialization and stuff like that, and they somehow needed to all work together, and otherwise we didn't even have a base, right? So in release 2, we kind of extended the framework with other use cases, but we didn't fundamentally change the core, if you will, right? Now, so we have there's two things that is different in my view. One is that we need to make some changes in core that are because we see that today the framework is not so there are some holes or there are some scalability, and you see that it takes a long time, so it's very error prone and stuff like that. So that's one thing we have to fix. And then secondly, we have all these parallel activities, right? So like this one is one of them. So if you ask, but that's my personal opinion, what we should, so in other words, what I would suggest how we should work is like we have to avoid doing things that are making changes into core, right?
Right.
So like everything to do with ports and stuff like that. That's why I was pushing back a little bit on this use case that Subhash had, right? Because you need to actually change core in order to do that properly, right? Because and I'll present tomorrow something to fix it. So if you're interested, you'll see. So we are trying to do that. So in other words, SIG 2 is actually at the moment a bit focused on the core thing, although I don't believe that in R3 we can do major things, right? And then so we have, so what you see is that you have then adjacent activities, right? So that are not really driving changes into core, such as, so here we have some of them. But so in other words, I think that's why I was proposing to do like what we call these proof of concept approaches, right? Which means that you kind of prepare how that use case would be covered, right? And focus on a demonstration as the first step to then see how to evolve it from there, right? Because you could basically do a proof of concept on the team on its own, and I think the team executing in this case is a bit. I see this also changing a little bit, because before we had like everybody looked at SIG 2 and we were the execution, but at the end of the day, I'm expecting a lot of people that are on this meeting here will also help in the execution.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's no longer SIG security and then we hand it over to SIG 2, and then so it's actually we are one group together. What SIG 2 will do is basically track what is happening. Yeah. And at some point, if the progress is not fine, okay, then we have to make a decision: is this still part of R3 or not? Right. So, right. So in other words, so what my personal view is like this identity stuff is very, I would say, isolated right now, right? So in other words, I think you can do it. That's why I was proposing even last week, start on your own with the people here on the call, probably, maybe there are some other people interested, and get things going, right? And as a result, you're not depending on anything, you see, right. Because otherwise we create these huge dependencies between anything and anything, and nothing will happen, right? That doesn't work in my view. So, and we will make everybody unhappy, and people will basically bail out because we don't make progress. So my proposal is go and start building something that you believe are interested. Share as soon as you have something, share it with the team like you did on Friday, right? Yeah. And with the rest of the community, and then we'll take it from there, right? So, and then you go step by step. At some point, we'll see, okay, we really need this component to be there ASAP. Okay, then we just get it get it there and we merge it into the mainstream project. I mean, that would be my proposal, but
yeah, if I have some comment, I think I agree. I think let me start from user identity. Many other can kick in. It's the kind of isolation touching point with the nephew core is very minimum because that's the idea. And the long time ago, application is that they handle the security by themselves. That's why they coupled, but we don't do that anymore. So it's a decoupled manner. So we protect the application outside. So using ingress or using the item, using some kind of redirecting. So that means application, they are behind this security, the protection. And so I think the POC, I agree the POC, but still need low-level design. So POC, I did a lot of POC in the POC architecture and hand it off to POC developers, but they need some kind of low-level design because this is security. Mostly,
but at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, we need, in the team that is working on this use case, we need a mix of people, right? So people who are doing the designs, people who are doing implementation and stuff like that. But you could build this group out of this community that you have here on the call, I guess, right? Because I'm expecting most people who are interested in this use case to participate in this call. So as a result, if we have enough people that have mixed skills, like you suggest, right, to be able to tackle it, go for it. Would be my.
It's not waterfall. It's the mixture, as you notice it. So we design and then the developer configure and then changing it. So constantly just the circling. Especially the security is the kind of mostly configuration, and then also and that's the user identity. So I think that we need to step down a little bit. We have to provide some more detailed design. And also Epic's user story. That's the starting point to me. And workload identity, I don't know how Shiv taking it, but if we generate, I don't know that we're using SPP. If SPP is generated based on service account, that means somebody define the workload and they have to change the script to generate the SPP, the identity based on the service account. Those things are also configuration changes. And then this could be good POC. I'm not sure Shiv willing to combine the service mesh with the SPP, but it's up to him. But anyway, direction is we need some little bit more design, little bit low level design and the user story. Okay, go ahead, Shiv.
Yeah. So basically, we have identified a bit of detailed design for workload identity. And that's in the context of workload identity and a bit of secrets management. We'll bring in the service mesh aspect probably a week down later. But currently, right now, I'd like to share with the team the detailed design that we have. I'll be adding some more detail, but I'll be happy to give a quick overview right now.
Yeah, I think if you share the information, it will be nice. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. That is one thing that I wanted to, but I don't know. I mean, maybe we can discuss it next week. There is another topic on, let's say, identity in the context of, you can say, specialization itself, right? Because today we have, so today we just run a job, right? But nobody has any identity-based information. So we could, but it's probably a topic on itself. So I'll prepare some slides maybe for next week.
Okay,
and
cool.
then we can discuss.
Sounds good. Wait, it's not. It's so different from the workload identity. You're talking about something else.
Yeah. So in the management cluster, right? So what happens at some point? So if you see, so we run the specialization jobs, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing is like, what are they authorized to do and not to do? And what is it that is executing it? So in order to basically give a policy, you actually have to assign it to something. So that's the whole thing that we should, let's say, discuss. That's kind of the thing.
Interesting. But I think, Daniel, we discussed internally, but okay. Yeah, I think I have to hear from your use cases. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the one, specialization, who can do what authorization. I think they could be user, could be client. So if you provide use cases next week, it will be great. We already did some kind of a internal discussion about, but if you have provide use cases, it will be great.
Okay. On that note, let's see what Shiv has to say. Shiv, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So this is the top level diagram which I have for workload identity in general. So we have this management cluster over here. Yeah, so we have a management cluster and we have a Spire server running in the management cluster. And we have Spire agents which are running in all the clusters. And there's a single trust domain, and all the Spire agents need to get themselves attested by the Spire server. And each of the workload pods or the workloads, they will be basically getting their SPIFFE verified ID from this Spire agent. And so, for example, we have a config sync pod, or I've just termed it as config sync pod, but basically, whichever is basically creating other clusters, right? So that particular entity, which is basically using the cluster API, will be creating other clusters and then writing the kubeconfig file into some sort of secret store so that other workloads can access the same secret. So here I've shown a config sync. After using the cluster API, it writes the kubeconfig to a secret store, and then a bootstrap secret controller, which is basically later on reading the same kubeconfig, and then creating the Git tokens, and then writing the Git tokens, and then there is a Git client which is on the workload cluster, which is accessing those Git tokens. So all these workloads are basically attested by the Spire server finally. And so that's how they're able to access the shared secret store. So this is the overall diagram.
Okay, question there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Could I ask you a question?
Definitely, yeah.
How do you manage the secret? I mean, this secret store as the secret encrypted, or how do encrypt them if they are encrypted, or okay, do you have any strategy on the protection of these secrets?
Yeah, so currently I've assumed that we have a vault-like, system in place, vault-like store available. And so that basically takes care of all the, so let's say,
so let me state here, we may not want to go down that route. The assumption here is that there exists some secret store, and that secret store might have certain properties that the secrets are encrypted at rest. When the secrets are transmitted, they are transmitted with full MTLS or TLS.
Okay, maybe the question
Yeah.
is more general. I don't want to know the specific detail on the algorithm to encrypt. I was just wondering if the strategy is to put in Git the secret encrypted, or if you put in Git some reference to the secret and then some reference to the secret that could be stored in some 3PP typical KMS, HashiCorp, or some other ACP. It was just this. If the idea is to keep the encrypted secret in Git, or to keep the location of the secret that are maybe external to some external storage. It was just this, or if in the context of this presentation, it doesn't matter. There could be also clear text because it's not the focus of what we are investigating.
No. It cannot be clear text. It basically has to be some sort of TLS or some sort of connection like that. And the assumption is that we have a secret store which is giving us some storage capability, and also it has a way of mapping an identity to a secret. That means there is some policy available over in the secret store which enables us to ensure that only certain identities can access certain secrets. So that gives us some sort of isolation, right? For example, if you have, let's say, kubeconfig, so not all workloads can read a kubeconfig. Only designated workloads can read a kubeconfig. So that's
but Shishu, aren't we digressing here? Like, the whole point of this discussion is about workload identity, and secret store here is an example user of an identity, right? Like, so let's I think let's keep that discussion separate.
Okay, it's out of scope.
Yeah,
okay.
I agree, but actually there's a small caveat. Probably we can come to that later, in the sense that the Spire server itself needs the kubeconfig basically for attesting other workload clusters. So that itself, there is some sort of a small dependency. I'll come to that at a later point. Right. So yeah, but this is the overall idea. So one of the basic things is, so initially we started out whether we need federation or not, and so on. So, and then we sort of quickly realized that if federation is configured, then we need to have the Spire server running each of the clusters, and that's a huge overhead and it's not acceptable. So then we sort of decided on having a single Spire server running the management cluster and a single trust domain. And the Spire server in the management cluster can be horizontal scaled, as a stateful set or a deployment based on the load and what all other HA considerations. So that we need not go in as of now, I mean, in terms of the POC, but then it can be done if needed. That's the point. And
yeah, I see that Wim has his hand raised. Maybe Wim, you want to go first?
Sorry.
Is there anything in the context?
Yeah, can you go back to the picture a little bit?
Yeah,
the previous one.
Yeah,
because there is some. I think first of all, I think the config sync pod in this case will run on the workload cluster, so the picture needs to be changed a little bit, I think.
Sorry, I think the point was whichever entity uses the cluster API to create the workload clusters. I think my labeling is wrong. So yeah, I agree to that.
Yeah. So at the moment it's cluster API that does that itself, right? So so for the moment our secret store is at the moment Kubernetes. Now whether it's good or bad, maybe it's a good first step, right? Now so I think what you see is that so what you're basically saying is the change that we should do is that so probably we need to add config sync pod is probably not the right one, so there should be something else that uses the cluster API secret that is generated and then gets a service ID from the Spire agent, right? And then the rest happens. So, but okay, that's a small detail. The second thing is like the kubeconfig itself is giving you keys to the kingdom, if you will, right? So don't we need more granularity depending on the type of workload and the identity?
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Issue, I think that we can't keep, right? Like the kubeconfig as it is in the secret store, that it beats the whole purpose.
No, correct. So the kubeconfig is way too permissive, I think.
Yeah.
Because you have admin rights, right?
Correct. So at least, I mean, I'm assuming some sort of secret store with some policy, right? So, I mean, I've just.
I was thinking more. What we actually need, Shiv, is the following, right? So, based on your identity, someone needs to give you rights, right?
Exactly.
So you will get ABAC and RBAC rules that are assigned to you as an identity, and based on that, you can do certain things or you cannot do certain things, right? I think that's the next level probably that we need to say, is that one is because even for let's say the Git client right now is a good example. It's basically saying you can get access to a repo and what capabilities you get from that access, right? So so there are some ABAC and RBAC capabilities when we expose that GTIA client. So there we actually tell which rights that entity will have, but the only thing that he'll get by accessing that token is access to Gitty, right? Or to whatever Git server that we have, right? But and we should do that also for the other entities that are needing access. So we need to basically, it's not just kubeconfig, and maybe there are certain things that need kubeconfig, but ideally you want to avoid them, I think, because this is too much.
Right.
Sorry, but this secret store is a Git repo, so you use it as an example or whatever service you access to show how to use these identities.
So this
It's
Git
like,
store, secret store is not, sorry, it's not a Git repo, the secret store. It's basically a proper, something like HashiCorp Vault or something like that. But
okay. And so when where the kubeconfig information, where do you take it? I mean, you put and get from this secret storage, but then it comes from outside, or from the beginning.
So Manuela, I can maybe give you some. So today what happens when we create a cluster, right? As part of the cluster creation, a kubeconfig file is created as part of the entity that creates the cluster.
Registration.
So the kubeconfig file come from outside, meaning that it's part of the cluster registration, because you need to put inside the credential, a lot of sensitive data, and so on and so forth.
Correct.
Okay.
It's the admin access to the cluster.
It's strange
it's
to me.
Admin rights to the cluster. Yeah, I agree with you that it's straight. I mean, it's straight. Yeah, that's why I was making the point that this is maybe too much for now, right? Because I think what we should do, I think, is say this identity wants to have access to this, right? He explicitly asks for certain permissions, and someone grants them, right? Like we do today with the service account. So if you are a workload today in Kubernetes, what you do is you create a cluster role or a role activity, and you want to bind to it, and you assign a service account to that, right? So that's kind of what I was thinking. So basically, you ask permission or you ask access to certain things based on your identity, and based on that, you will be granted or not granted certain things.
Okay, I think that here we have two levels. Yes, and I think that here we have two levels. The first one is the authorization you are speaking about, the fact that you need to be able to access to that storage, having a service account or some more specific role to access only to the secret that you really need, instead of everything that is contained in the storage. And this is the first. And then anyway, this even if it is not in scope of this part, we need to assume that the secret is encrypted.
Correct.
Maybe some note, something to say, okay? We assume to encrypt it using the KMS tools that are part more or less of every 3PP that provide this kind of feature. And also maybe in the some more detail explain how to get and put and so on and so forth, and make it viable for the usage that require that you decrypt. And then also the fact that opposed to the service account that provide the same right to everyone, explicitly, maybe even just for example, distinguish between the access to I don't know, the kubeconfig of some kind of workload server with the workload cluster. I mean, the same user cannot access to all the workload cluster, but only to the one that contain the cloud native application specific of the network that has to manage. So we need to split a little bit the network that we have to access, and also, and this is true also for the access to the secret store, I think. Okay,
Yeah,
maybe
so-
it's
so-
the first time that I listened to your presentation, maybe I didn't get all the points, but this is what it come to my mind as a comment.
Yeah. So basically,
Okay.
yeah, point taken. So basically, some sort of policy needs to be there in place, and some
Yes,
sort of ADAC,
exactly.
basically, which says which identity can access which secret, right? I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
Shiv, again, I think we are overstepping the scope here. The policies, the authorization, integration with secret store is a subsequent problem. What we are trying
agree,
to
Rahul, agree. Yeah.
what we are trying to work upon here is to get the workload identity in place in a way such that that workload should be able to prove its identity, get the attestation done, and that attestation will require a bunch of elements to be in place which can be independently verified by the Spire server. That by itself, once we have done that, what we'll be able to achieve is an extension of service account beyond its Kubernetes scope. Once we are able to achieve that, then all the policy authorization for secret store, for service mesh, and bunch of other, there will be 100 other use cases
Agree.
will automatically
Yeah.
enable, right? Like, so the
Yeah.
scope here is workload identity purely, and not the policy and authorization that will come in the subsequent step. I just want to make sure that we are clear on the scope here, for the whole of this thing, because
I agree.
if we go in the
Yeah,
other
right.
direction, we are going to not end the discussion.
that's the
Agree,
current
yeah.
shift.
It's too much. It's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
question to Shiv, I think you already talked about here. When I saw diagram first, the question is you are using only one trust domain, meaning the placing Spire server in only in the management cluster. This is the one trust domain. But you already mentioned the text you can be federated in other configuration is possible, but maybe POC I just start, maybe you want to start with this way. That's my understanding.
No, the point is we don't want to have a Spire server running in every workload cluster. So because
Yeah, okay.
the Spire server itself will take up some resources, and it's a management
course.
overhead, right? So
Okay.
if we can make do with one Spire server, I think it's very good. And we can do as of now, and we can go ahead. In case we find, that there are issues with scale and all that stuff, but that is not a current problem which we need to solve.
Yeah, this is the first problem you like to solve. Okay. Later
Yeah.
on, it can be reconfigured to have federated case in case the operator they have own Spire server in their workload cluster. They want to work with the management cluster. Then there's another story. But I just thought I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
One
Right. Yeah.
server.
So HA scale and all is a different problem. So we're not looking at
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then coming to workload registration. So we need to register the workloads with the Spire server, and the reason is that then the SPIFFE IDs will be given out selectively to those pods or those workloads which need the identities. Now, this could be based done based on labels which are set on pods. And I'm just thinking loud over here that labels could be set by a KPT function, but I've not gone into the details, and so they're just thinking loud. But then we need to have a controller, which is basically actually registering the workloads with the Spire server, and those workloads will be those entities which actually need those IDs, because not all entities might need IDs. So at least from the perspective of service mesh, maybe again we'll have to take a look, right? But then we can do it selectively. That's the point, and we'll need a controller in that case.
A quick question, Shiv, if I may. A workload,
Yeah.
would it reflect to a package, or is it more granular?
So it depends upon it can be a pod, it can be a deployment, and so
So
on.
it could.
So, yeah.
But it could be determined. Is it a deploy? So it's more granular than a package. So it's a deployment. If it's a pod, it could be that it's only being is it then a pod derived from a deployment or is it more granular? Because if you, so with some changes that we are doing, so tomorrow I'll present in SIG2 a more flexible framework right now, in which case you could, in any resource that is part of the package, you could build your own, let's say, specialization entity. And you could build some rules that will allow you to provide these type of capabilities. So in other words, but you are tied to the KRM resources in a package. And I'm wondering if that's good enough. So in other words, you don't even have to write a cat function. I came up with some new framework that allows you through expressions just to modify whatever you want.
Okay. Okay, so basically this is, I mean, first thoughts, basically, Wim, it looks like this is slightly orthogonal to that, in the sense that...
Correct, yeah. But yeah, so, but the reason of my question is the following, is it something that can happen from at the management cluster, or it has to happen at the workload cluster, was my actual question.
Okay, so coming over here, right? So basically, finally, all this registration has to be done with the Spire server, right? And
Yes.
we need to sort of, say that all these entities with these particular attributes or these particular labels, they are registered and they will be given out IDs. Now, it has to flow back to the management cluster. All this registration.
So it has to come at the management cluster. So we could, in the pipeline, basically add a component that does that, which is focused only on this action. Would that work?
Yeah, that should work. So, which is basically saying that, no, but in the pipeline, as in how that, so that will finally turn out to be a controller?
So the way it works right now, yeah, it's actually a controller, but the logic that is inside, you have the ability to tune, if you will, right? So it's a controller, yes, correct. So think of it as a controller. So in the pipeline right now, it's fixed, right? So we have a package. And so like one of the use cases that Subash had was a policy, right? I want to do validation after the package is hydrated. I want to check for compliance or whatever rules you want to do. Here, it's a similar thing, right? I think I'm okay. Someone is in the approval process. You need to ensure that there's an identity for each of the entities that is in these manifests, right? And only when that is allocated, you can continue, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. Does that work?
So there is a precondition here about doing the workload registration in the first place, right? Yes, that's the precondition. Yes, the workload registration has to be there in place, because if you look at the agents here, the only task of the agent is to do attestation, nothing else, which means that when this agent does an attestation, they prove that these are the workloads that I can attest to. So hand me over the IDs, and then I can provide those tokens to those workloads in any shape or form. It could be secrets or environment variables or a bunch of other ways. But the other question that you asked, Wim, is an important one: the granularity of the identity itself. That's an important one, because so based on what I've seen of Spire doesn't care as to what the granularity you want. If you want it to be at the workload level or the package level in this case, that's fine too. If you want at a different level within the package, within the pods, if you want the identity at a particular container level, the only point that has to be handled when the granularity changes is how do you do attestation at that particular granularity. That is what changes.
Well, my point was the following, Rahul. I have two questions, if I may still. So one is, okay, so what I'm trying to say is at the management level, the level of granularity we have is all the KRM that is inside, right? But what you sometimes see is that, okay, you give it to an entity on the workload cluster, and he like, for example, take a deployment or take a stateful set or something like that. I want 10 of these things, right? You get 10 entities. That is not controllable potentially by the management cluster, right? So so you have access towards the deployment, if you will, and you potentially know how many. But then when it's further flushed out, and you also know the containers that are inside, so all of that you know. But you, at some point, there is, so you give the rights to the workload cluster to then do scale in, scale out, and blah 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 blah. You don't want to have all these controls on the management cluster potentially because you want to act autonomously, right? So that's where my question was coming from: is that, is it enough to is that granularity going to be enough for what we want to do? And I have the feeling yes, but I'm not 100% sure.
No, I
and
don't.
then the second,
Go
so
ahead.
let's maybe first. The second question I had was, okay, let's say I am providing you. How do we ensure that that, let's say, ID, if you will, is no longer cannot be used by someone else?
Yeah, I mean that's if we breach that contract, then basically we don't have an identity solution in place. If someone else can spoof the identity in the first place or ID, then we don't have strong enough attestation. So the whole point of this this whole workload identity is, how do you establish that attestation? What are the factors that would contribute towards that attestation, and how can that be done in a decentralized fashion with least impact from the user point of view? Like, user should not have to need to execute any action explicitly. I think that's where.
But for example, so what I'm trying to say, let's say I take a package, right? Let's say there's two packages, one for UPF, one for SMF. Let's take it a simple case. And I give one to SMF and the other one to UPF, but at the end of the day, all of this information is accessible by many entities at the moment. So someone could just use the ID. So how do we ensure that that is tied to that SMF or that UPF that we are providing it? That's kind of
my question. Sense, so the point is, so I think your specific question is, how does a Spire agent ensure that whoever is using that particular ID is actually that particular entity? Is that
yes. Yeah, so I'm an SMF, right? And you give me an ID. I'm using it, but it's possible that someone else takes it and uses it.
No, but so the SVID is a signed document, right, by the Spire server credentials. So only if the Spire server felt that you're a valid, let's take this example, right? Let's say config. Let's say Bootstrap secret controller got ID 1, right? And
how does the Spire server know that is the Bootstrap server? Is my question basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a valid point. So basically, there is a workload attestation which happens with the Spire agent over here, right? So the Spire agent is basically local to the node, and it uses the kubelet commands to find out that this part which is asking for this ID is actually resident on this particular node, and is actually the part which it says it is, right? So there are two aspects to this. One is basically a workload attestation which happens at the local level at this particular node, and there is a node attestation which the Spire server does for each Spire agent. So the Spire agent, once it gives out an ID, it knows for sure that this particular Bootstrap secret control is running on this node, and it has this particular name, and it has the trust domain / this particular pod name.
Okay.
And this will not collide with any other ID which is given.
But we have a bit of a different. So my use case is a bit different, but I think you probably answered the question. So we will have an entity on the management cluster. Let's call it the Spire's identity provider, right? That is the controller that we talk about. So let's think of it as the Bootstrap controller or the config sync, right? But he will run on the management cluster, and he is attested by the system, right? So that's all good. Now we at some point we want to deploy an SMF, okay?
Right.
I think what we were saying before is that entity that that was attested to be Mr. X, right? Or person X, is going to provide an identity on behalf of that SMF, or is that what is going to happen? And then we have to ensure that that doesn't move, because the point is the following: is in the management cluster we have this SMF that gets an ID at the management cluster, but then it gets moved into its entity where it's going to run. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, so you have got cases where entities move between clusters?
No, so in other words, the flow that we have today is, let's say we have an entity inside of the management cluster that is taking care of service or identity with the Spire server. But then I also understood that we wanted to have something that when we, on the management cluster, when we try to deploy an SMF, okay, at a certain workload cluster, the identity for that SMF, where is that going to be allocated?
Okay, so let's say, this is the SMF, which is running on the workload cluster, right? And so in the Spire server, we would have configured telling that you might get a workload with this particular identity request, right? And which says that that particular with that particular cluster name and with that particular pod name and all that stuff, all that mapping is stored over here in the Spire server. So when this particular entity asks for its ID, that ID is obtained all the way from the Spire server and given it over here.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're doing.
Yeah. So sorry, Wim. I think we have just 2 more minutes left. I think this would be an interesting conversation to have, because ensuring that how identities cannot be spoofed is a major topic, and if we cover that carefully, that would essentially set the basis for the whole of workload identity anyways. So what I would suggest is that maybe in the next discussion we can take it forward this discussion, and then we prepare towards the specific diagrams, whatever would be required. The primary question here is, how would the identity be established? Let's say SMF and
across the cluster. Shiv, can you share this document? I think it's a great document. We are like the brainstorm. Is it possible?
Yeah, okay. I'll do that. Yeah, it's a work in progress. I'll be adding diagrams, but then
it's okay. We understand. So okay,
sure.
Just
thank you.
Share those. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. And is there any other? I mean, I know we have just 1 minute left. I see that a lot of other folks have joined in. Is there anything else that we would like to discuss before we close? Anyone wants to bring up a point?
My proposal, Rahul, is next week. Maybe let's focus this first. I'll do my part after that, right? Because that's, I mean, it's probably first important to flush this out, right? Because my use case is just more granularity.
Got it. But
okay, that's fine. Thank you.
It's central to the theme anyways. So yeah,
correct.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Good week.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.